Hi, everyone. Welcome to the VFX Notes podcast. My name is Hugo. I'm here at Hugo's desk, but I have no idea where Ian is.
Hugo, I'm right here. Hi, everyone. Hi, Hugo.
Hi, how you doing?
What are you doing in my office?
Oh, I see. This is Ian's desk now.
I wish this was my office. Oh, my God. If you ever get a chance to come into Hugo's bunker.
No, don't come.
It's insane.
Don't come. This podcast is brought to you by Backlight. Backlight Creative enhances the entire creative project lifecycle. For pre-production, there's Celtx. For script writing, beatboards, shot lists, and planning. And Backlight Gem, a narrative design platform for games and VR. For post-production, we've got ftrack Studio to manage creative projects with custom pipelines and reviews with cineSync and ftrack Review for high-res, real-time media collaboration. To manage your assets, connect your own storage to iconik, a scalable cloud-based media asset management platform. You can learn more at backlight.co. And now on to the show.
It's so cool to be here, man. Thank you for having me.
I can't believe you were just on a plane just a couple of hours ago.
Just on a plane from Sydney to London. Now I'm here. I was here last October before the View conference.
Yeah.
Now I'm here right before the FMX conference. Where we're going to be at together very soon, presenting together. You've got a million sessions. I've got a million sessions. But it's so cool to be in the same room, man. Amazing.
I know, it's so different. It's so cool. And we're actually doing like two shows, like we're doing today and we're doing a live show as well. And it actually reminds me, like if anyone doesn't know yet, like you should know that now we have a specific exclusive episode of VFX Notes just for Patreons.
Yeah, right. And we call that VFX Notes Plus, and it is just for Patreons. So they'll be able to, whenever we record one, which is monthly, log on, watch us discuss a film or something to do with visual effects, and live chat with us.
Yeah.
That's actually the fun bit, right?
Yeah, it is. It's really cool. We've done one already. We're going to do one today as well. And yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing to talk with all of you. And I really want to thank everyone that showed up on the stream and had a lot of questions. We had a lot of questions last time, so it was great. I really loved it.
Yeah, I did love it. So yes, thank you to people doing that with us on Patreon. Thank you to our Patreon supporters. We always also want to make sure we shout out to our supporters in terms of sponsors and people who like and subscribe us on YouTube. I mean, we wouldn't be able to do it with you, so thank you so much.
We wouldn't. Thank you so much. But yeah, I guess I can't believe you're here. I can't believe you're actually here. This is so cool.
Let's though jump into it. We're talking today about HBO's The Last of Us.
Yeah.
Quite frankly, a stunning series on HBO that came out this year and based on the game. My first impressions really quickly, Hugo, because I'm actually going to let you talk a lot about the game TV crossover because I'm a non-game player. You know, I really saw a lot about The Last of Us when it was released. And of course, there's Last of Us Part 1 and Part 2. And haven't played it because I'm simply just not a gamer person. And I feel bad about that. I wish I was. But as a series, The Last of Us was captivating. And I just want to say that up front. I think we might save our review on the actual show till after we've talked a little bit about the game. What do you think?
Yeah. I mean, that's a good idea. This is really special for me. And I was so worried about this because there's
some bad video game adaptations. Let's just say that.
I know. Well, I actually have an episode about that. but I was really worried because this is such a fantastic game. This game also came out a long time ago. This was a PlayStation 3 game. Right at the end of the PlayStation 3, it was by Naughty Dog, which was at the time an amazing studio that has made all the Uncharted games by that time, and they were really famous. And then they make Uncharted is a really like action Indiana Jones type of game. So no one really knew that they had this on them, like an apocalyptic, dreary game. And
that's filmic, right?
Yeah,
that's the thing about, as far as I can tell, the game is it's filmic in nature.
Absolutely. The game is literally like you're playing a film. And I think when we all played the game back then, we all kind of knew, oh, this would be a great film or this would be a great TV show, although you're interacting with it, So I think it has one of the best plots in video games history, and it's like really emotional. That's the whole thing about the game. I'll be honest, I think it was the first time I've ever cried on a game. The game is quite emotional.
Wow.
It's also very dark. It's really brutal as well. The game is very violent, super violent. The game is like plus 18. And it was an experience. And this was in 2013 when the game came out the first time. From there on, like Neil Druckmann cemented himself as one of the biggest creators of video games in the history of video games, because they won all the awards that you can win on this game, all of them, like everything from Game of the Year to the BAFTA, everything that they had to win, they ended up winning. And that's really cemented the quality of this game. Of course, then there was Last of Us Part 2, which was not as well received. It was very controversial when it came out, but it's also a fantastic game. In my view, it's even better than the first one.
Why was it controversial?
Well, I don't want to spoil it. So it's very
okay.
controversial.
Good point.
Because there's something that happens on that game that everyone hated. Like everyone just absolutely hated. And also the game does something that we haven't seen in a long time. It reminds me back in the day in the PlayStation 2 time where Metal Gear Solid 2, when it came out, the main protagonist of Metal Gear Solid 1 was not the main protagonist of 2. And on this game, Last of Us Part 2, the main protagonist is someone else.
Yeah.
Although Ellie is also a big part of it and Joel is a big part of it, there is another protagonist, and everyone hated that protagonist.
Right. But
That's why.
But I can see how that changes things up, and Naughty Dog did it to try and be different.
Yeah,
but,
absolutely.
But Hugo, I have a question about the game, and this will probably frustrate people who totally know how computer games and video games work, and I'm such a noob on it. That I think is also one of the takeaways from the Last of Us game, which is cutscenes versus gameplay.
Yeah.
I reckon I'm still confused about what effect it has as a player viewer watching the cutscenes and getting story points from that versus actually playing the game.
Yeah.
You know what I'm getting at, right?
I know exactly what you mean.
I'm curious about it. How did it go down on Last of Us? It must have been good.
It's fascinating because this is 2013. At the time, graphics were still not as good as they are. And in fact, the footage you're seeing now, this is the remastered version of the game. The game didn't look this good when it first came out. It looked a lot worse. But it also had this cinematic level, the lighting and the camera work and the acting, especially the acting. Neil Druckmann and Naughty Dog's team made a huge effort to use pretty much all the technology that at the time Avatar did, like everything that James Cameron made.
In terms of performance capture through
yeah.
to final.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay.
And I think that's the turnover on this game, is because you start having high quality performance. Of course, performance capture was a big thing in games before that, but this is the first time we had a full body facial performance capture in a high level, just like on Avatar. And also the actors are very, very good actors, because one of the things that plagued games for years was that there's really bad acting on the games themselves. We had not that they were poor actors, but it was rushed, low budget, only one take. So a lot of times the actors didn't have the time to make a good performance. This game is the different thing. In this game, they had the time. They spent a lot of time on the volume. Neil Druckmann directed them like if it was a real film. And so the cutscenes are a film. Pretty much. Yeah. They are a film. And in fact, it's funny to see the TV show, because then you see the cutscenes again, but you see them on TV show from HBO. So it was a very strange experience for me, because I've played the game so many times. I played the game 3 times now, and it was weird to see the same thing. So there was no surprises when I was watching it, but that's my fault.
But I have one little nuanced part to that question, which is cutscenes being pre-rendered can look a certain way, right? As in look good, because they're pre-rendered. Versus gameplay, which is running in real time.
You were asking me that,
and I used to think maybe for some gamers that used to take you out of the game, or they used to just skip the cutscenes because they just wanted to get into the gameplay. Yeah. But I've always heard Last of Us was so engaging in terms of the pre-rendered scenes. Yeah. Tell me about the distinction between them.
and it's I'm really glad. I'm sorry I didn't answer that question the first time.
No.
I'm really glad you mentioned that, because that is a big contention on the game as well. A lot of people play games just for the gameplay. So some people don't like that there's 10-minute cutscenes or 5-minute cutscenes. They hate it. They think this is a game, we should be playing it. And there's a lot of criticism on this game, because the game is not deep enough in terms of gameplay, because it's all about the story. So I would say that there are like two separate camps on the games industry. You know, like you have the people that play games for pure gameplay. And I would say that those are more linked to, you know, stuff like Call of Duty or stuff like a shooter or even Fortnite, games that are not really for the story, but they're just for the shooting or for the team effort or for playing with someone online. And then you have the story-driven games, which is like The Last of Us. And I think from all the story-driven games, Last of Us was one of the first ones that cemented video games as I would say, a proper storytelling device, you know. And it doesn't become frustrating when you're playing it, because the gameplay scenes are really cool. They're really action-packed, brutal, violent, and you have to shoot, you have to craft, you have to use help, you have to resolve puzzles. And then you have these moments of pause with the cutscenes. And because the cutscenes are so well acted, the music is so good, you know, and the acting is so good, and the performance is so good, and the graphics are so good, you completely swap away. When I'm playing, I put my controller on the table, you know, like I put the controller on the table and I just watch the cutscene. You can skip it if you want to.
You can skip it.
You can skip them, but I think it's this game is special in that sense. But you know, I know the audience is not a lot of gamers, and I don't want to spend too much time on this. Podcast is not about the game, it's about the TV show. But I just wanted to like mention this, because if you liked the show, and if you like games, or if you haven't, you know, if someone from the audience, maybe if some of you haven't played games for a long time, I think this is actually the perfect game to give it a go, because this game is not very difficult. It doesn't require a huge skill set. It's a quite easy game. It's more for the experience that you play it. It's a remarkable experience. And if you like the show, it's a huge extra, because it shows so many other things that the show doesn't have. As the reverse as well, the show also has a lot of things the game doesn't have. So it's a great compliment. And in fact, Sony are loving the success of the show, of course, because now the game is on the top 5 again. So the game has went up the sales because everyone is now playing it.
How many hours would the part 1 of the game take to play, do you think?
Yeah, so this game, part 1, first came out in PlayStation 3. Now this is PlayStation 5 version, which is the remastered. This game takes like, if you're really rushing, it takes 8 hours. But if you play it normally, about 12.
Right.
About 12 hours.
I remember when it came out, and some gamer friends in Australia, they like nearly lost their marriages and partners, because I think they just stayed up all night playing this game. It was that immersive. Yeah. Okay, I have one more nuanced question about the gameplay cutscenes and pre-rendered scenes. Like, that used to be a complaint about games, that the pre-rendered scenes look so good. The cutscenes were, of course, real-time rendered game engine things. What was it like playing this game, though? Did you ever feel like you were really enjoying the pre-rendered things in terms of quality, and then it was different in gameplay? Or was it, you know, basically because it uses the same game engine, I assume, to render the pre-rendered scenes?
Yeah, so
was it
I'm really glad that you've mentioned that. This actually is one of the first games that it's all a single experience. So the cutscenes or the same engine, it just cuts off seamlessly. Because I know what you mean. Before, we had games where the cutscenes were full
It used
CG.
to be a complaint.
Used to be.
I remember. Yeah.
Now this is not the case anymore. Like this is actually the engine running, and it's the actual game playing, and then the gameplay is exactly the same. Obviously, the angles are better, and the lenses are better, and maybe the bokeh and the depth of field is a bit higher, so the quality looks better because of the depth of field. And on the game, there's no depth of field because, of course, you're playing it. So I think in this case, I think this is also one of the first cases where you had a seamless experience. Right now, all the games are like that. Like most games now, cutscene, engine, it's all the same engine. This was a proprietary engine from Naughty Dog. I can't remember the name of the engine, but it's only from Naughty Dog. It's one of the best engines in the world in terms of photorealism. And I think The Last of Us Part 2, for example, looks stunning, and also Uncharted 4 looks stunning. They are on the same engine. And so I think it's the most advanced engine Sony has at the time. And this is really like speaks highly of the quality of what Neil Druckmann and his team pull out of Naughty Dog, to a point that, you know, Naughty Dog ended up being bought by Sony because they were the most successful studio that they were working with. And now, you know, Neil Druckmann, you know, he started as a game designer and now he's like the president of Naughty Dog, you know, like the whole thing, like, I feel this is the first time ever that I've also seen a moment where a game director becomes so successful that then he becomes a film director, because he directed some of the episodes, you know.
Yes.
So, and he's also heavily involved. He wrote the episodes as well. So,
yeah.
You know.
Well, clearly that's a good place to segue into the making of the TV show.
Yeah.
And probably the reason why the video game to show translation works so well, because Neil Druckmann is heavily involved.
Yeah.
And the other showrunner is Craig Mazin, who has a really great history of making great shows. Chernobyl was one of them. I mean, I think I've watched that series twice, which I never usually do. Double watch a heavy series like that.
To watch twice, oh my God.
You know, but you can feel in this series, can't you, Hugo, the emotion come through of these characters. So just in terms of a review of the series, I was captivated from episode 1 to the last one. I love that it was week by week, even though I actually didn't watch it week by week. I watched it later. But still kind of watched it once a week in a way, you know, not binging. And so I thought that was a really, you know, that's something that's happening a bit more now, whether you Netflix a show and watch it all in one go or whether you enjoy it week by week. I think this is a show to enjoy week by week.
Yeah.
Because it's a discussion you can have with your friends online every week type thing.
It's funny that you say that because the House of the Dragon was the same thing. You hate that you have to wait week by week, but also like it's so cool because you talk with people, you talk with friends, you go to forums, you go to Twitter. Although it's a bit of a problem with shows like this because I ended up having to watch. I already knew the story, but I wanted to see what differences it had. I watch it week by week at the time of release at 1:00 in the morning because you do not want to go to Twitter. It's such a problem. It's such a problem. People spoil everything, and I really don't know why people want to do that because it sucks. It sucks to get spoiled. But you know,
but what I also like about that week by week thing is that HBO spends a lot of time making inside the episode videos and what's coming up next. Now, that might sound like they're full of spoilers. Somehow they craft these really well to not include spoilers, but to give you, especially me, a behind-the-scenes junkie, a bit more information about the behind-the-scenes. It's not always about the visual effects. It rarely is, actually.
It's the production,
There was occasionally on Twitter, I would see a lot of behind the scenes, including from one of the cinematographers on the show, or the cinematographer. That was really interesting. Again, not too spoilery, which was good. And of course, Craig Mazin and Neil jumped in, you know, with information, which was really cool. But just as a general takeaway, I thought
you liked it.
So compelling.
I was so curious to see what you would think because this is such a. I feel like this was a secret, you know, like this story, we all played it in 2014. All the gamers knew it, you know. And now it's like public because it's now reached so many people, you know. The original game sold 20 million copies, so that means 20 million people watched it, like played it. Now, of course, the show had like 20 million per episode. So it's like, it's a complete different scale now, of course.
Well, let me ask you this. Here's a really obvious observation about the show, is that yes, the video game is 2013.
Yeah.
The show is 2023. Yeah. We've just been through a pandemic. Clearly, the gravitas of the show is enhanced by the pandemic.
Absolutely.
Right? I mean, you just feel it.
It's even more interesting how The Last of Us Part 2, which is the sequel and it continues this apocalyptic pandemic thing, really, it was actually interrupted by the pandemic. So the game right at the end, when they were polishing it, that's when the pandemic hit, and then Naughty Dog, like all the other studios, had to close and they had to all go remotely. And so they ended up finishing the game remotely. Of course, it was only the final stage. A game takes a lot longer than a film.
Yeah.
So a game takes like 5 years. So they already had all the capture done. Everything was already done. It was just the tweaking. But it must have been so interesting for the people making the game because they were making a game about something that was happening.
Yeah.
They must have felt like, oh my God, what if this is what's going to happen? And we're making the game of what's going to happen.
But don't you feel like watching the series of part 1 effectively when we witness people's reactions to being told what to do by the government, or even literally the fungal outbreaks, which, kind of doesn't necessarily match COVID, but occasionally I'll hear about a fungal outbreak somewhere. Like recently there was one on Lord Howe Island in Australia, and you're like, oh my God, the marketing really has gone too far in this show. No, but like it's a real thing, meaning, people are starting to fear these kinds of things.
Oh, yeah.
Much
Absolutely.
more because of the pandemic.
Absolutely.
So the show just felt like it had much more impact because of that.
Absolutely. Because when it first came out, it actually had a problem because the games industry was completely so fed up of zombie games.
Right.
There was so many zombie games, and that's why they're not called zombies. In the game.
Yeah.
So because the zombie term was toxic at the time.
Oh, yeah.
Everyone hated zombie games. There was too many zombie games. You want to play another zombie game? It was just like zombie games coming out all the time. And I think at the time they called it clickers and they called them something else, and it was the fungal thing. It just became something different.
The infected,
exactly.
Yeah.
But yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with you. Like now it's such a different gravitas of watching this series now. Oh my God. Like, it must have been, even for them, I'm assuming that they were developing it during the pandemic as well, because this must have been years ago that they were writing it and developing it, and must have felt really weird to be writing about this,
And shall we add something else to that, as in high impact? Clearly, another part of the high impact is Pedro Pascal.
Oh, yeah.
He's on a winner at the moment with Mandalorian and
he's the
other
flavor
films,
of the year, yeah.
And I mean, I don't even want to say the terms that people use to describe him. Okay, I'm going to say it: the daddy of the internet. but
No,
I mean,
he's on a high.
he's a perfect casting. It's somewhat different in some ways. It feels to the gruff,
completely different
character in the game.
Completely different,
but really good casting still.
Yeah.
I mean, that is a bit like any other show where they grab an actor who's at their hottest, and so why wouldn't he, appeal here as well? But perfect casting, right?
Yeah, it is. Like, and I think I like this idea that they actually casted someone else completely different from the game, because Joel on the game is a much, he's different. He's just like more rough and more bearded, and it just sounds different as well. It was acted by the amazing Troy Baker, which is one of the most famous actors of the games industry.
Right.
He's played also characters on Uncharted as well. And also Ellie, Ellie on the original game is a completely different actress as well. She looks very different. Even Joel's daughter as well looks very different. I like this idea. I like this idea that they've casted someone else. And I feel like this is... I hope... because now there are rumors that they're making Last of Us Part 3. I really hope that they don't end up patching these games to make them look like the show, because this happens sometimes. For example, Spider-Man from PlayStation as well, a few years back, they've changed, when they remastered Spider-Man, they've changed the model so that you would look similar to the films. So I hope that doesn't happen, because I like that there's this differentiation. But I guess... I didn't want to shoehorn there, but I just wanted to give you my thoughts about the show, because, I loved it, but I also didn't love it.
Here we go.
Yeah, I know.
Here we go.
I know.
Strap yourselves in, everybody.
Look at this: the worst and the best. No,
Hugo's looking at his notes.
For me, like
I better have a drink.
Here's the thing. Hear me out. I love the game, played the game twice. Of course, there's a problem here because I'm tainted by the game. Of course, it's going to be very difficult to live up to the standard that I open up the game. The game is so good, and it's difficult to put that standard. Having said that, I thought the show is amazing, and I thought at least the first few episodes are stunning. I loved this talk show at the very beginning on the first episode and the scientist on the second episode. I love this momentum that they had these intros explaining what happened, which on the game, nothing is explained.
No.
You have no explanation. On the game, you have no idea what happened. And which lends to be a good game because of that, because you have no idea.
Do you eventually find out in the game?
No.
Oh,
No.
interesting.
You play the whole first game, you have no idea what happened.
Okay.
And so, of course, if you look closely, there's posters and there's magazines and there's like stuff that you can read through the gameplay, and there's little bits and bobs.
Yep.
It's a little bit like The Road, the book, which also doesn't explain anything. I've never read the book. I've watched the film, but everyone tells me that it doesn't explain anything that what happened.
Yeah, so the intrigue is preserved because you're making up in your head what happened. Yeah.
Cool thing about this is that Neil Druckmann decided, I'm sure it was his decision, because he's involved on the screenwriting, he decided to show a lot more. And I love that. I love to know more about it. I really love those intros. So that was something I thought it was amazing. The performances, also love the performances, especially like, some of the beats of the game. I've played already some shots like that. There are some beats of the game that are exactly translated to the film, to the show, and they're like shot-to-shot cameos almost, which is amazing. It's amazing to see it filmed with a proper camera, with live action, and see it with all its glory. This is all good, but for me, the not so good is that I feel that this show is rushed. The game takes a lot longer.
Yeah.
And it takes longer to do things. So the emotional tone of the game, for example, when Joel's daughter dies, it's a really dark moment on the game. It's so dark that you cry when you're playing the game. I thought on the show it was too fast. It was too quick. It just like went and we are already on the next thing. And this has to do with the fact that on the game you take longer to play it. I think the emotional tones of Ellie's of Joel's daughter dying, also of Tess dying as well. All these moments are so much better in the game, and the emotional tone, it didn't grasp me and it didn't make me emotional when I was watching on the show. I thought it was a watered down version of that. That was the problem I had with the show. That was it. But that's my problem because I played the game. That's why. I think.
No, I didn't feel it obviously as a non-game player, but some of the criticism online was that because each episode did jump in time, that for an audience member that could feel a little bit tricky. I didn't mind that because it actually meant that every episode felt different. Yeah. Especially considering there's that standalone ep. Number 3 or 4 with the partners. And I mean, I love that in the middle of this crazy zombie
that's
show.
Not even in the game.
I know.
That entire thing is
and
not
how
even in the
good
game.
is that? Like,
but it's amazing. This is even better that you think. But because in the game, you only meet one of them.
Yes.
Because they don't both die on the game.
Yeah.
But you hear about the story of Bill. Yeah. You hear about what Bill was. You hear about him.
Yeah.
And then you see the suicide note of Bill. And you read what happened. And it's amazing the fact that on the show you see what happened. So it's almost like I played the game and now I go and see actually what occurred. And I thought that episode was brilliant. And I think that episode is probably going to win an Emmy. I'm sure the performance are going to win an Emmy as well. Which then will be, I think, one of the first moments where we have a game that won all the awards, and I think the show will win the awards as well. And I think that's going to be a once-in-a-lifetime thing, a big thing for Neil Druckmann. But I'm glad you've mentioned about the jumping. Some people hated the jumping. I hated the jumping. I thought that it jumped too much. I thought every episode was too disconnected. On the game, it's much more a seamless experience. And because of that, one of the biggest issues is that on the game, the infected are everywhere.
Right.
You are constantly being attacked on the game. And on the film, on the show, I mean, where are they? Where are the infected?
But
where are they?
But structurally, I can totally understand why the filmmakers here would have done that. Yeah. Because of what you just said about zombies, although that was about games.
Yeah.
We've seen a lot of zombie TV shows. I know. And I think from even a visual effects point of view, it can be boring. No. It can be boring just seeing zombies gunned down all the time, right? Clickers. I know. And so it was clearly deliberate, not just expense-wise. No. But audiences are like, if we see too much of them just being gunned down, we see that they're too easy to gun down, right?
I know what you mean.
And it can take away the fear factor of them.
And I think it has to do with the video game element of it, because obviously on the video game you have to have stuff to do.
Yeah.
So you have to kill them because you have stuff to do. Otherwise, what? It's gonna be a walking simulator if the game has nothing to do. So I think, in the game, they kill thousands of clickers, because you have to go through hordes of them to get to where you go.
But can you see how that actually would have made it a bit they're too easy to kill?
I know. It would have made it worse. I know exactly what you mean. But I just felt that the last time we saw Infected was on episode 5, which was when we saw the big swarm and the bloater, and then it's gone. You never see them again. I just felt that it needed to show up at least once or twice. So, I just feel that it was too few of them. And I think that has to do with one of the major changes that they made, because on the game, it's airborne, the infected. It's by spores. It's by air. So when you go into these environments, there's spores floating around, and they have to use masks. And then that's why everyone gets infected, because it's airborne. On the show, I'm assuming I think there's a podcast where Troy Baker, the actor of the game, has a podcast, and I think he had Neil Druckmann on the show, and they talk about the fact that first of all, if they had masks, you would never see the actors.
Yeah,
that's
a tricky
first problem.
Thing. Yep.
Second problem is if it's hair spores, there's an enormous amount of VFX that has to be done because every single shot has to have particles, and then the other issue as well is that everyone would die. Like, everyone would be infected all the time. Like, everyone is just infected. And that's what happens on the game. It's so easy to get infected because you don't have to be bit. You just have to breathe it.
Oh, right. So they changed the rules to suit the plot of the show. I see. And I mean, just thinking about it right now, sounds like it was a good decision.
Well, on the game, it's amazing to see the fog and to see the spores, and you're floating through the spores, and you see them in 3D. So it's an amazing gaming experience. But on the TV show, it would suck.
I see.
I like that they've changed it.
Yeah.
But that single change made it so that you don't have so many infected.
I see.
That's the thing.
I did read an interview with Craig Mazin, and I can't remember what the source of this is, where I think in general he acknowledged that there wasn't much clicker action, and that part 2 of the series may have more.
Yeah. It has to have more, because the second one, I don't want to spoil it to anyone, but the second one has 2 story plot lines that go through at the same time in different time frames. And there's so many clickers. Yeah. There's actually bigger bloaters. Like, you saw the bloater that you saw. There's actually even bigger ones, like fatter and bigger and like even more gross and like almost bosses, like there's even worse.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it for me, of course, it totally worked. As you being someone much closer to the game, I can see how that would shape
I think
everything you think.
One last thing I just wanted to mention that is really positive about the game is, about the show. I feel like, as I already said, I think this is by far the best adaptation of a game ever made. And I wanted really to shout out the music, because the music, which is from Gustavo, he's an amazing composer. And the amazing part of this is that he's the composer of the game. He's actually the composer of the actual game.
Oh, and the show.
Just to be clear. So it's the same music. The same exact. Well, they didn't even compose new. It's the same music that they've used.
Wow.
So that is even more. Well, although it's orchestrated in different ways. Sometimes it's a full orchestra. It's on the game. It was mostly guitar. So that becomes a huge resonance, because the music is beautiful. The game's music won all the awards, and I think it's probably one of the best soundtracks of a game ever made. Ever made. And I'm glad that they've translated it to the show, because the music is so beautiful. And then as a player, because I played the game, I just get transported to the game because I listen to the music. Obviously, Gustavo is very famous. He's not only worked on Last of Us Part 1 and Part 2, but he's very famous from The Insider, from Amos Perros, from 21 Grams, from Brokeback Mountain. He won 2 Oscars. He's a really famous, accomplished music composer, winner of 2 Oscars already, and one of the best composers out there. And it was a big deal that he did this game, because in 2014, not a lot of music composers would pick up the phone to do a game.
Right.
You know what I
mean? It wasn't the thing to do.
Exactly.
Which has probably changed a little bit
completely.
Since then. Yeah.
Now video games are actually a bigger industry
Sure.
than film, much bigger. And every year, video games, have bigger audiences. They are more and more produced. And now video games budgets are 300 million, 400 million, 500 million. There are now games that are actually more expensive than a Marvel movie. So I think things have changed completely.
Yeah.
But back then, Gustavo's involvement on the game was a breakthrough. And I'm so glad that he's back, because I think that's one of the best parts of the show. The music is astonishing. I feel like it's an astonishing soundtrack.
I totally agree. In fact, it now makes me want to go and watch it again.
Yeah.
Almost like watch it all in one go, like a big, huge, long movie,
Yeah.
which I don't always feel like doing for these series. I sort of feel like I've watched it, that's enough.
Yeah.
This series
It's very
does feel
cinematic,
like...
so yeah.
I know how you feel about each episode feels different, but I think it would be really awesome to watch this like in a cinema or something like that.
Yeah.
It does have that, of course, cinematic quality to it.
I'm gonna give it a go, because I feel like also watching it every week, maybe it I need to watch it. I've watched it once, and I rewatched parts of it for this show.
Right.
But I'm waiting for the Blu-ray, because the 4K Blu-ray is coming out in a couple of weeks, and I want to watch it in 4K on my projector properly. Because I watched it on a crappy stream from Sky. Sky Atlantic broadcasts it here.
Yeah.
It's in HD. It doesn't look that good. It's a bit blurry. I want to watch it in 4K properly, as I should, So, because I think it's
And Sky had those ads in it or something.
Oh yeah, it's all completely. It's like half an hour of ads during the middle. It's really, really bad cuts in the middle of the show that just fade into an ad. Oh my god, don't get me started with that. And anyway, I think we've talked enough about it. Like I had all this list of differences.
Oh my god, Hugo, no.
All the differences between the game and the show. Look at what I did here. Look at what maybe I'll do a video about that someday.
I think you might need to do a standalone bonus episode of VFX notes.
Let's dive in to what, half an hour in. Let's dive in to what we're supposed to talk about here. Hey, everyone listening now, this is all my fault. That's why the show is too long. I'm sorry, I talk too much.
Not at all.
But let's just dive into the VFX. So this is a big show. So
huge show, as
HBO
anticipated, and as HBO is for these kind of series. Generally speaking, we should mention the visual effects supervisor is Alex Wang.
Yeah.
He's actually ex DNEG and ex ILM, and is the production VFX soup on this show. I mean, there's something like 14 or 15 or more visual effects studios, Hugo.
Yeah. 16, 3,000 VFX shots.
Insane, right?
250 shots per episode.
Yeah.
It's like, it's a motion picture level, VFX level thing.
Yeah. And the heavyweights on this are DNEG and Wetter Effects, but there are many more studios doing a lot of work that's of the classic invisible variety.
Yeah.
Horse replacement, stunt replacement, face replacement, scars, environment fixes. It's just that kind of show. It's a post-apocalyptic world. Of course it's going to have that sort of stuff. But we're going to talk about mostly two big types of effects, right? Environments and then the clickers. So first two environments, Hugo, with DNEG.
Yeah, it's fascinating, because this is the type of show that when I watched it, I didn't even realize how much VFX was in it. Because, I figured, they probably did it on a street. Oh, they probably, dressed up some stuff. You kind of think about those things because it looks so real. And it's, I guess this is, it's the same team from Chernobyl. They are very realistic type of filmmaking. When you look at Chernobyl looks so real. And that's the thing about it. Like, I wasn't very fond of the show itself, because I thought, oh man, it was a really hard watch for me because it was so heavy and so dark. But you have to hand it over to this team and Mason. Like, they are doing some of the most realistic looking filming, and also the camera's moving all the time, and the camera's shaking all the time. But you don't even notice it. When you're watching the show, you see a street. Oh yeah, I'm sure they did the street there. I'm sure it's all good.
Hugo, Chernobyl, you mentioned, we both mentioned there. I would say this about what I feel Chernobyl and this show have in common, which is clearly the filmmakers, the showrunners, have no fear about just going out and shooting something, knowing and trusting their visual effects studio can produce a very convincing environment around the actors. I mean, because they had to do it here. You know, we're talking that cities were looking like destroyed and or didn't even exist, as in locations in cities that didn't exist that needed to exist. Plus, of course, they shot them in Canada mostly, places like Edmonton and Calgary. To look like American cities, right? Yeah. Which there often are, and that's, you know, Toronto always stands in for New York City, for example. But what I was fascinated by when I talked to Dean Egg, for example, for an article on Befores and Afters, plug there, was that I thought they just went and shot most of it blue screen or something like that. Yeah. But no, they'll go and shoot somewhere in Edmonton and then use that building structure from the DOP's framing of the sequence to then inform how they might put a degraded building there instead or whatnot. And then, of course, they've also gone and shot out in Pennsylvania or other places for scouting, for LiDAR, for actual plates, you know, to use. But what I'm trying to say is I thought most of it might be a blue screen shoot, which is not the case at all. No. It's location photography a lot of the time.
Not the case at all. And it's heavily, I mean, there's some blue screens and there's some stuff like that, but it's fascinating to see these behind the scenes, to see these photos, because I was a bit shocked when I saw them. I didn't expect this much work. We're talking about like full CG. There's a combination of here of full CG environments together with complete CG augmentation, either from vegetation in Houdini, from full CG buildings on the background, completely integrated and merged with the real buildings. But then there's also like a 2D side of it. There's like a matte painting side of it, of patches, projections. So it kind of depends on the shots. On some shots, we have like a full environment CG, and then on some shots, we have a full matte painting going on there. And I don't even know what to say. Like there's so much. There's so many shots.
I was thinking while watching the show, only Americans and Canadians might pick up the errors in terms of geography. I was convinced it was always Boston or Salt Lake City or Kansas City or there's Jackson, Wyoming in the show as well, I think.
Yeah.
So
supposedly,
when a show or a film is able to do that and they just get the general feeling right of the location that it's meant to be, especially for someone in Australia who doesn't really necessarily know exactly what every location of Boston looks like. I mean, it was brilliant, convincing. Yeah. And, you know, most of the time you're kind of looking anyway at these buildings that are destroyed and that have vegetation on them. I wanted to mention something that Dean Egg did tell me, which I thought was really cool. Now, some of these buildings, they're actually bombed out, right? Yeah. From raids to try and destroy the infected and fungal infection from 20 years earlier. So Dean Egg told me that they actually developed this like Houdini tool that produced bomb-shaped holes and destruction on some of the buildings, and then just used that to kind of fill out, you know, background buildings, maybe some foreground ones as well. It just added, of course, to the realism behind that work. And you've already mentioned, you know, for the vegetation, they clearly used a lot of scattering and procedural stuff in Houdini. I definitely thought the environment visual effects here were a step up from Dean Egg, from what they'd done previously, and really
this is a huge these are huge sequences. We're talking about over 500 shots. You know, there's like a crew of 600 people working on this thing. It's insane, and it's really cool because first of all, I feel like the cool thing about this is that we already have a game, you know, like, so there's a game already. There's also this amazing art book, which I really recommend. It's a beautiful art book from the game, where you have all the concept art, you have the game you can play, and you have all of this work that Naughty Dog done as well already. And I think Dean Egg talks about on an interview that they were quite involved on the development of these VFX. So you have like already the perfect reference. Then they went over and actually took LiDAR scans, they took photos from Google, they used this tool, what's called OpenStreetMap, and then they kind of like combine with LiDAR, with street photography, with aerial photography, and of course drone photography, together with the inspiration from the concepts, and created this very realistic world, really. Like, I mean, you look at it and it's like you don't even question it at any time.
No.
I mean, and it's also very well done. I thought the shots were beautiful. Obviously, on some wide shots, it's really jarring, mostly because you're so overwhelmed by detail, so overwhelmed by broken stuff.
Yeah.
And as a person, you're not used to see that. So I think that's why you kind of look at, oh my God, there's so much stuff here. But it's amazing detail.
But did you generally think, in terms of DNEG's work, that what also worked well was it was mostly establishing shots and background shots?
Yeah.
Unless I'm misremembering, there didn't seem to be any fake drone shots of the environment.
It's
or anything
like
that.
shots like this, for example. This is the kind of shot I'm talking about. When you look at this, it looks photoreal. There's everything is perfect on it, but there is something when I look at this that your brain automatically knows that this is fake, because there's no such place in the world.
Yeah,
that's why. But when you look at some of the other shots, like shots where you just have complete environmental replacement, these shots, most likely most people would never know that anything was done.
Yeah.
That's credit to DNEG, because I think a lot of people still think this show has no VFX almost, and has very little VFX, and they only notice the VFX when they look at these shots.
Yeah.
And I feel like that is, especially shots on the street with rain, when you see the QZ, like these shots are outstanding. Also the night shots as well. Like I feel like DNEG did they did like film level work at in this show.
They did.
And I know the barrier is getting smaller and smaller and smaller these days. Like when you now look at a TV show, when you look at House of Dragon, when you look at Last of Us, you don't even notice a difference anymore.
Yeah.
And I think they don't take a difference anymore. Their pipeline is the same. Everything is the same. The artists are the same. I think things have really changed from the old days of bad TV shows.
This is just TV. Yeah.
Exactly. Things have really changed.
What about this shot, Hugo? I think this is a classic because it's the end of episode 1 when they're kind of revealing a clicker.
Yeah.
Although, if you just watched the show once, I think you didn't really see it.
No,
you had to sort of zoom in on the...
He shows up right at the end here. He's actually there, but you don't hardly see it. And when it flashes with the lightning, that's when you see it. This is a carbon copy from the game as well. There's section of the game that is exactly like this. And actually, this building that is flat on the ground shows up on the game as well. Most of these shots are straight out of the game. I love that they have a crater with blue screen.
I need to give you this photo of a building in Sydney, opposite the University of Technology Sydney. There's this shopping centre and hotel which has growing vegetation, droop down over the building. And hilariously, I was interviewing DNEG for this story while I was staying up there in Sydney at this hotel, and I looked out the window and I said, I've got this view of this vegetation hanging down from this building. And someone said, "Oh, is that a building in Sydney near the university?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And she goes, "Oh yeah, that was a reference we had in our kit." Because you want to see how vegetation plays against office windows and lights. Yeah. And I mean, that building in Sydney is really cool and it looks brand new, but it also looks like if it was left alone for 20 years, that the vegetation would take over
completely.
So yeah, that was was funny when I did that interview.
Yeah. Now like I said, most of these shots, you need to send me that photo so that I can put it in so people can watch it.
I will. So that was DNEG's work.
Yeah.
And just to remind everybody, there's literally 16 visual effects studios, so we don't mean to miss anybody out. But clearly some of the biggest work is done by DNEG and also done by Wetter Effects.
Yeah.
In terms of especially episode 5's big clicker battle. I am going to be slightly controversial here, Hugo, as I am only occasionally am on the VFX Notes podcast, and say I think this show did represent one of those ordinary moments in visual effects discourse where we talked about the internet, talked about Twitter, talked about even some of the filmmakers, to be honest with you, talked about, oh my God, look at all the practical effects work we did.
Yeah.
without immediately recognizing the digital visual effects work. Now, here's the truth about that. Craig Mazin and others absolutely praised Weta and DNEG. But the discourse...
And Barry as well.
And Barry...
He always does it.
Barry Gower, the prosthetics and makeup effects supervisor here, completely praised all the digital visual effects work. What I'm really getting at is, when each episode aired, I felt there was this discussion for at least... for weeks about how, wow, look what they did with practical locations and practical makeup effects, which they did. They shot places. They filmed things. Barry's work here on the bloater. Yeah. Incredible. Just incredible. But partly because of how this works with press and media coverage and whatnot, there wasn't this recognition that so much of this work was taken over by digital visual effects work, as it's often done. Yeah. And I think it was eventually when articles came out and when HBO also had a great making of, which totally showed the work that these companies were doing. Yeah. I just felt like the discourse, as usual on the internet, was so much about the practical that I was kind of getting a bit bored of that discussion.
Yeah, me too. And especially if you watch closely on the show, not to disrespect Gary's work and his team, if you look closely on the show, it doesn't even look like that. Like it's completely reworked. Yeah. Like the bloater looks completely different. Yeah. The place where he has the spores and the actual ratio of his body, the way he moves, it's a completely different thing. And I'm not going to disrespect. I know that there was a very famous bodybuilder dressed up as the bloater.
That's Adam Basil.
Basil, a stuntman from Game of Thrones. So all of those are great stories. You can talk about the stuntman. You can talk about Gary Bauer. You can talk about the 80-pound suit. We had this discussion so many times. All of those are clickable things. Yeah. What's not clickable is the 600 people inside of the VFX studio working on it. I mean, that's the problem.
Yeah. Let's be frank, though. That practical work clearly is vital in informing the visual effects work.
Of course.
Because
if they didn't have the suit there, they would never know how the suit looks like. I know. Yeah. This is, and I know that probably on some shots they left it. I'm sure that on some shots they left most of it. Some shots they left
for the bloater, I don't think so. But for makeup effects for the rest, infected, clearly, that also was great work by Barry and his team.
It's an amazing work. Amazing work.
I'm getting more at the fact that your casual Twitter person says something like, "Isn't it great how much practical effects work is done here?" I could probably find you articles from, publications where they only talk about the practical side. Yeah. Now, some of that is HBO pushing the practical side because they just don't want to enter that thing about CG and how everything is CG'd up. The thing is, in this case, especially Weta FX's work in that episode 5, I mean, they have upped the ante here to make it insane. Now, let's just talk about the bloater, for example. Yeah. This is another article on Befores and Afters, another plug here, with Weta FX. One of the things they simply said was that when they were reviewing shots with Adam in the suit, is that, well, it's a big rubber silicon suit that looks like rubber and silicon when he's being asked to do complex stunts.
Yeah, of course.
So the CG replacement is simply about taking that away so that the audience doesn't say, oh, it's just a rubber suit.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So that's an obvious reason to use CG. Yeah. The other thing is he's ripping people's heads off. Oh, yeah. He's coming out of a big hole.
He's like moving around. Yeah. But the problem, though, this is, of course, a main audience problem. The problem, though, is that you then go to Twitter and you read people writing stuff like, oh, my God, it looks so much better with the suit. Oh, my God, this suit is amazing. Look at it. It's so much better. We should all just use suits all the time. And I'm like, and they have no idea this was replaced, because that's the problem. We reached the point where this is for real now. And people think it's a suit. And then when for example, famously, there's like a very famous YouTuber that makes film reviews. He's now making a film. He did a Kickstarter, and he's going to make a film. And he's already stated multiple times, they're going to use rubber suits. They're going to do all for real thing. And it's going to be so funny to see when he starts filming and he then realizes that he has to do it in 3D. That's the most fun part of all of this. And I think this Discord is only exclusively from people that don't know what they're talking about. Because when I talk with VFX people, and when I have this conversation about, oh, it's so bad that on Twitter they're just saying that it's a suit, and most VFX people don't even know that this Discord is happening. They're like, oh, what do you mean? Like, we all work together. They love the work, and we work together, and we collaborated. Yes. I think it's really like people outside this world that are, and unfortunately it has millions of clicks and it has millions of views. So it's hard. This is a problem that is going to be hard to solve, and I think it's just going to get worse because as the VFX, man, like this girl that comes into the car, trying to kill Ellie, and she does there's an entire behind the scene about her amazing, the
female performer is basically an acrobat who could do these crazy upside down, contortionist movements. Now, she could, but when she had a makeup effect prosthetic on her head, she didn't look like a child anymore because that's what she is, a child clicker. Yeah. And so it just worked that VFX could roto-anim her, and in certain scenes they could replace her to make her look more like a child. Yeah. Also because she's doing eventually crazy moves. So it makes sense to, enable those crazy moves by CG. Yeah. But, I'm completely positive. I've read some articles about, with the title, Amazing Contortionist does all the stunts
everything
herself.
Yeah, I know. And also, like, when you look at these shots, like these wide shots, I've read articles of saying, oh my god, it's so much better when you do it all for real and it's all CG. Like, it's the whole thing, the entire thing is a CG. Again, we keep saying this on the show, and we're just talking to ourselves because this doesn't matter. If you think about it, it doesn't matter. It's good that people think it's real, I guess, because it's the ultimate compliment to DNEG and to Weta. Like, when Weta and DNEG gets this praise, they're like, oh my god, they think it's real, then we did our job.
They've done the job.
They did their job. And I think this is just going to get more and more like that.
Yeah. I would actually love... Craig Mazin did do an interview about this particular sequence in episode 5, where he talked about how even he couldn't tell in some of the wider crowd scenes, like who was still real and who was CG. And I would love to sit in like a review session or to hear him, analyze sequences, and also to like discuss performance. You're wanting the audience to react to a certain kill or a certain chase moment, and sometimes you might have shot the right live action element for that, but sometimes you just might not have got it. So that's where VFX can come in and do incredible work, and they clearly did here. Plus environments, plus fire, plus deaths. I mean, it is bread and butter for a visual effects company.
They really shot. We're not discounting that. They really shot it. In fact, if you read the American Cinematography last month, they have these sets. They were built. And if you look at these photos, like this is the photo without VFX, for example, most of TV shows in the world would look fine. This would already be good, minus maybe the two green guys there. But minus the two green dudes there. But but the thing that happened here was that Weta picked this up and up the ante, like you say. Like, you already have an amazing crowd, you already have an amazing practical effect going, but then you put all these extra clickers and all these extra people and all the extra fire. There's already fire there. And this is where I think the conversation gets muddled, because when people that are not on this industry look at this, they think, oh, they had all real fire. But then they put more fire, and no one ever notices it. No one never. And this is amazing. Like, I can't believe we reached the point now that no one will notice this. No one notices that half of these people are CG, half of the people are real, half of the fire is real, half of the fire is not real. And how much have we progressed to a point that now you can't even, it's blurred the line completely.
I think another interesting part of this whole big sequence in episode 5 is about performance. Yeah. They pre-plan things. The actors work out what kind of zombie performance they're going to have. And as far as I can tell, as VFX mentioned to me, that a lot of that performance sometimes needed to be found in the edit, because they didn't want it to necessarily look like zombies, but maybe that's what they got on set from some of the performers.
Yeah.
So Craig asked VFX to go away and do some extra motion capture, or, you know, find a different kind of performance of the bloater and of the other characters. So there's another thing that visual effects does, is that it comes in not just doing post-production work, but actually exploring character and movement and behavior. And VFX can do that because they've got a stage, they've got experienced mocap performance capture professionals there who are often animators.
Yeah.
You know, and they've done all this work on Avatar and the Apes films. So I kind of like the idea of also praising visual effects studios that aren't just coming in at the end and doing this. They're actually informing character and movement and making it even better than what was done on set, which was already great.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
Yeah.
I before we move on, I just wanted to mention that it's an incredible time that we're living right now, and I feel like when you look at this show, you know, like 13 years ago I played this game. This game, of course, looked good at the time, but when I played the game for the first time 10 years ago, I thought, oh man, this is never going to be a film. You're never going to be able to do this. Like, there's no way you can do such a big horde. There's no way you can do this kind of VFX so well. Like, and things have evolved to a point now that we're now here discussing how people think it's all real and people think it's all a suit, or people, and it's, I can't wait to see what happens next, because for me, the visual effects industry is now on such a different phase. Like we used to be, on the beginning, on the 90s, we were like, oh my God, this film has like these 100 VFX shots. Oh my God, it's amazing. Jurassic Park, The Matrix, like all those films. And it was like a starting thing, you know, it was like starting, and films had these moments of VFX. And sometimes you would notice them, sometimes you wouldn't. Depends on the film, of course. Depends on how it was staged. Depends on all those things. But you kind of knew. Now, you don't know. Like, that's the fascinating thing. Even, of course, this is an apocalyptic show, so obviously it's going to be lent to VFX, of course, because it's an apocalyptic show. But it's an amazing time that we're living, where every TV show has VFX now. And I feel like the audience, of course, might not even notice that they're watching, and of course the Discord helps to sell tickets. It's like Top Gun, although again, you know, like Top Gun was all for real, but it wasn't, you know. It helps to sell the ticket. It also helps to bring the magic of cinema, you know, just like the old days of Millet, where he was a magician really filming something. And I find it fascinating, this phase where we're now not noticing anything. Do you imagine, like, we're talking only about 10 years, you know, like, well, 20 years ago, we were talking about like The Matrix. And now imagine 20 years from now, like, I mean, we're probably going to be close to a complete full CG entire sequence without you even noticing that it's in the full CG sequence. We had that a couple of months ago when we talked about Dune. Dune has these fight sequences in the desert, which are completely CG.
Yeah, DNX work.
And I bet most people didn't even notice that they were full CG.
No.
And I know that this, I'm talking to people that already know this, but maybe someone on the audience doesn't know a lot about VFX, and I find it fascinating. I think Last of Us is a turning point to TV, really, not also for the originality, but also for the amount of VFX and also the way it's staged and filmed and accomplished. It's everything that Chernobyl was, but up even 10 times more. You know, it's like it's a different stage.
Yeah.
Because I know we had Game of Thrones, but Game of Thrones is a fantasy show, so it's different. You know, you have a dragon, you have like all those things. This is like set on our world, you know, it's set on this time.
It's gonna happen, right? No, Hugo, I think I know where you're going with that. And in fact, in terms of that VFX, digital versus practical thing, it taps into that as well, ties into that as well. Because I imagine HBO and the showrunners would be just as happy not to reveal that, for example, this fight sequence had so many CG characters. Because there is a joy that the audience has in seeing Adam Basil in the practical suit and Barry Gower's work. There is a joy that we've talked about many times on the podcast.
This tweet.
About Which is a hilarious photo because that's the practical suit, but that's the on-set VFX supervisor, not Alex Wang, but an on-set data wrangler, with a grey ball and color chart for VFX reference. So anyway, but Hugo, we should talk about another thing that WetterFX was responsible for, which was the giraffe.
Yeah.
But hang on, wasn't the giraffe all practical?
Yeah, well, I'm looking at it. It's all real. It's all there. It must be. Yeah, well, here we go again, right? Like, I mean, we already just discussed about it, but the giraffe, I think, the giraffe was a different level because this was, I mean, by the way, this is a big thing on the game. This is a major part of the game where she sees the giraffe, and then there's a bunch of giraffes, actually. There's a bunch of them. There's just not one. But I guess this was the best thing that they could have ever had for the show's popularity. Because when this happened, it even made even more people go and watch the show. Because there are interviews where they specifically say everything is CG except the giraffe. That they keep saying this on every interview.
Well, my memory is I didn't watch that final show episode until a little bit after it aired. My memory was Twitter somehow popped up with blue screen shots of the giraffe.
Yeah.
And in classic Twitter form, people went, "Oh, I'm so glad they didn't do a CG giraffe." Now, then, in a couple of weeks after the show aired, the episode aired, WetterFX was able to do a couple of interviews.
Yeah.
Now, you had to read between the lines a little bit.
Oh my God.
Where I feel like they weren't directly asked whether they did a CG giraffe, and occasionally they mentioned doing background ones. And then, I can't remember which interview it was, where, they weren't being dishonest at all about their CG work, but they basically answered clearly and said, look, it's a CG giraffe, but we had the best reference there possible.
A real giraffe, yeah.
Because, you got that interaction with Ellie and Joel.
Yeah.
And we took as much reference as we could from it in terms of photography and animation, performance and movement. But to get the right performance for the show, it's CG. And I just think that is basically what we've been saying for the past 10 minutes, which is awesome. They use this as promotional, material for the show.
Yeah.
They're not going to totally reveal that it's CG because they're really stoked that it looks practical.
Yeah.
And you just need to read between the lines in an interview. I didn't actually get to talk to WetterFX about the CG giraffe work, but if I had, I probably would have gone into quite a lot of detail about how they did it. Anyway, I want to try and sound not cynical about it, but I also want to say this is how the best results happen. They shoot something for real, or they build a prosthetic or an animatronic. And then if it needs to be CG, it needs to be CG. Well, this is how it worked.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, it could have been filmed for real, but the thing with this is that it wouldn't have looked so good as it does on the show. That's the thing. It wouldn't, because you have the light interaction and you have them touching, and the performance might, giraffes, poor things, they're probably not that good actors,
But Hugo, that's an interesting point about how do we feel ethically and humanely in terms of actually shooting with a real giraffe. There are some shows previously where they filmed with real lions and tigers, and I feel like we've moved on a bit from that to not even shooting with cats or dogs now. Yeah. All I'm getting at is some people feel that you shouldn't shoot with real animals.
No, I personally don't think you should. And I feel like when I saw the TV show, because I didn't see these images before, I thought it was CG. I never even considered that they had a real giraffe there. I think it's very disappointing that they have a real giraffe. We've now reached the phase where animals can be done in CG. I don't think you need to I'm not saying the giraffe suffered. I'm sure it didn't, but it's not necessary. And I feel like an on-set environment is not a safe place for an animal like a giraffe. Accidents might happen.
Well, they might have gone to the zoo to film this one, but just generally, I know. How does it feel about being in a blue screen?
For me, you know me, I'm a vegetarian. I'm a vegetarian because of the animals. I see what PETA is constantly telling production companies not to do this, and in fact, just recently on season 2 of Lord of the Rings for Amazon, two horses died during the shoot, and I feel this is unacceptable. I feel like or maybe one I think it was one and the other one was hurt, something like that. Like they were very hurt, and one I think died, and this is really bad. Like I don't think we should still be doing this, and I feel like we now reached the phase, and I know it looks better when someone is riding a real horse, I understand that, but it's the same problem we had with live guns on a set that happened just recently, like with Alec Baldwin's film. It was the same thing. A live gun was there and the DOP died. I think we don't need these things anymore. And I feel like these days, like, I mean, I look at this photo, I understand that it was for reference. I understand. The funny thing with me, like, I feel like the actors probably think that the real giraffe is on the film. And I'm sure most people on the crew actually think that's the real giraffe. Yeah. Because like you said, you have to read through the lines and it's not very...
Yeah, just the small thing, caveat on that is possibly some of the shots are live action.
Yeah, potentially one or two, yeah.
But it just wouldn't surprise me, because when it eventually ultimately has a CG model, that they need to be consistent on shot from shot, then it becomes CG. So I just don't want to say it's all CG.
Yeah.
But yeah, in general, I'm of the view that if we can do it CG and it's the most humane way, clearly. I mean, obviously, they did everything to look after this giraffe, and we would never suggest it was a problem. On the Amazon show, they do look after these animals.
Of course, they do. And sometimes accidents happen, but that's the problem. Like, accidents happen because they're all there. If they weren't there, that wouldn't have happened. Yeah. That's the thing. I just feel like we are now... I know it's more expensive, but we are now in a phase where visual effects is actually cheaper than it used to be 20 years ago. And I just feel like it's, like... But anyway, I don't want to like end on the down note.
We're saying this sequence is really cool, and we thought the work was incredible, basically.
Let me do it. Let me like do a segue to something that I think actually was really, really funny. I don't know if you saw this, but I guess trying to promote the show, Saturday Night Live did a sketch with I have to end it over to. I can't believe that actually they convinced Pedro Pascal to do this, and I thought it was fascinating to do a Super Mario Kart version of The Last of Us, and I thought it was brilliant, and I can't. I guess this TV show and The Last of Us itself with this is now part of popular culture, isn't it? Like, it became part of it now. There's even like a sketch that has like 20 million views. Like, it's insane.
It became part of popular culture because of the game, increased because of the TV show, multiplied because of Pedro, and possibly anticipation of the new Super Mario film as well.
Which is also massive. Yeah. It's also almost making $1 billion now. And potentially going to become the biggest game-based film ever made. I just... Yeah.
By the way, quick shout out to SNL. They apparently have this amazing team of editors and visual effects artists, although this might have been outsourced.
Yeah, there's a lot of VFX on this show.
Yeah, to work on their little segments. This one is full of heat. And I think they only have a week to do it, right? Usually less.
It's very, very short amount of time.
Fun.
Yeah. It is. It was I just figured that we might end the show on a more positive note than the animals and everything. But I thought this was brilliant, and I guess I didn't even realize what you're mentioning about the anticipation of the Super Mario game. I guess when this came out, I wasn't even thinking about the film. I wasn't even thinking about the film yet, because now it came out and. And to be honest, I was not expecting it to be so well received. I was not. I guess it surprised everyone, including Nintendo.
I was going to make a joke there about me never having played the Super Mario games, but it's not true because I'm obsessed with the Game Boy and with SNES.
So, okay, you played it there,
but yes, this Mario Kart episode was brilliant.
Oh my god!
Part of it is the Pedro factor. There is something about him which is super relatable.
Yeah. And he's super nice and he's super nice, cool, and I'm sure he's like, for him to do this, like, I'm sure he's a fun guy, because this is something. This is laughing at yourself and making joy. It's real fun. Yeah, I find that fascinating. And there's also a really cool thing on YouTube. I'll put it while we're watching, someone actually went over and actually comped in the Mandalorian's helmet on Joel's shots. So when Joel is walking on the street with Ellie and actually driving the car with Ellie, he has a Mandalorian helmet. And I thought it was fascinating because if you put the helmet, his voice is kind of the same. It's kind of and he has this kind of like gruff. Yeah. He's always a bit in a bad mood. It's kind of the same character. I guess they could go back and do crossover with Narcos as well and put Joel in Narcos with a helmet and mix all three in one go. That would be fun.
This is the way you go. Well, I've almost had too much fun sitting here with you watching some of these pre-prepared slideshows and videos, and forgetting to say that one of my takeaways from the show was that I did find it a bit gloomy and a bit scary. Like, we're praising the show, but actually it was a bit like, oh my God, I feel like this
really creepy.
Happen. And part of it is that COVID makes you feel like the world is ready for something crazy again. But
it's funny that you say that. You know, the two most scary parts of the show for me, or that talk show on the beginning when they're talking about it, and then the woman that goes into the lab to see that cadaver, and then she says they have to bomb the city. Those are the two more scary parts of the show, and you don't even see any blood on them. There's no guns. There's some amazing TV for sure.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure I told everyone the feeling that I got from the show wasn't always joy. I mean, I was obviously marveling at the visual effects work, but yeah, they did a great job in scaring the shit out of the audience. That's just me saying. Hugo, so great to be here. I think we need to make this a much more common thing. I'm going to get you to come down to Australia.
Yes.
Although you will not really be impressed by my bunker. So, but anyway, thank you so much. Always cool to be here.
Oh, this was great. And thanks everyone for watching. I'll see you all in the next one.
See you later.
Bye.